Welcome to the deep dive. I am really glad you could join us today because we have a genuinely fascinating sequence of events to explore.
We really do. It's one of those stories that, start small and then just completely snowballs.
Exactly. You know how sometimes a localized story just escalates until it's testing the absolute limits of a country's legal and political systems? That is exactly what we're looking at today.
Right.
We are pulling our information from a comprehensively documented Wikipedia article, and it details the complete history of a British direct action network called Palestine Action. Okay, let's unpack this. We are looking at a group that went from splashing red paint on buildings to breaching a Royal Air Force base, triggering a national terrorism ban, and culminating in a historic High Court reversal just weeks ago in February 2026.
It is a staggering timeline.
It really is.
Well,
Now, before we get into the weeds, I want to be crystal clear with you. Because our source material covers highly charged political actions and touches on the ongoing Gaza conflict, this deep dive is strictly reporting the facts and events exactly as they are documented in the source.
absolutely. We are definitely not taking sides here.
Right, no endorsements of the group's actions, and no validation of the government's response either. Our goal is simply to help you understand the incredible legal and social sequence of events contained in this material.
And what's fascinating here is that this single group's timeline serves as a massive stress test for British law.
Yeah.
As we go through these events, you will see how it forces society to examine the very boundaries between civil disobedience, economic sabotage, and national security. It asks this critical question: at what point does disruptive protest actually cross the legal threshold into terrorism?
Which is a huge question.
It is. The state's machinery was essentially forced to react to tactics it just hadn't fully anticipated on this scale.
So to understand how the state reacted, we really need to look at who they were dealing with and what the initial goals were.
Right.
According to our source, Palestine Action was founded in July 2020. The founders were Huda Mori and Richard Barnard, and their stated mission was to end global participation in what they described as Israel's regime.
And they decided to focus that mission very specifically on the UK arms industry.
Exactly. The targets were highly specific. They primarily went after a company called Elbit Systems, that's an Israeli weapons manufacturer, and they have multiple factories and subsidiaries operating across the United Kingdom.
They also heavily targeted Leonardo, which is a major aerospace company.
Yeah.
Targeting the supply chain was the core strategy here. They went after various logistical firms, lobbying firms, essentially anyone they believed was complicit in the manufacturing or distribution of weapons.
But the defining characteristic of Palestine Action wasn't just who they targeted.
No, it was the methodology.
Right.
They completely bypassed the traditional protest model.
Yeah.
There was no standing outside a factory gate with picket signs asking for a meeting with management.
Right, none of that.
They engaged in direct, physical, economic sabotage that was explicitly designed to halt production lines entirely.
And the signature visual of these protests was highly coordinated. Activists would show up wearing these bright red boiler suits, and they would climb onto the roofs of these manufacturing facilities.
And occupy them.
Occupy them, sometimes for days at a time. They used sledgehammers to systematically dismantle machinery on the roof, smash windows. But the most recognizable tactic, the one that produced all those viral images, was daubing these buildings in massive amounts of red paint.
Oh, yeah.
And they weren't just using paintbrushes, they were using repurposed fire extinguishers to just blast the facades of these factories.
Which, when you think about it, the logistics of orchestrating these occupations are quite complex. You have individuals successfully breaching private, supposedly secure corporate facilities. They are scaling the architecture and entrenching themselves so deeply that police actually had to bring in specialist climbing teams just to remove them.
It's wild, and the source mentions one specific instance in Bristol that really paints a picture. Activists literally drove a cherry picker-style vehicle right up to the second floor of an Elbit facility.
A cherry picker.
Yeah. Broad daylight. They used a hammer attached to a rope to systematically smash the reinforced windows before dousing the interior offices with red paint.
The visual of someone casually operating heavy machinery to smash second-story windows is definitely striking.
It really is. And they didn't stop at factories. They also went after academic institutions they felt were involved in the supply chain. At the University of Manchester, members broke into a glass cabinet in the chemistry building and walked off with 2 busts of Chaim Weizmann.
He was the first president of Israel, right?
Exactly, and a former teacher at that university. The group released a statement claiming they had abducted the busts.
Wow.
And then at a Leonardo factory in Edinburgh, they escalated beyond just paint and glass. Activists managed to locate the actual internet cable boxes for the facility.
Oh, right.
They sprayed expanding foam directly into the hardware and cut the wires to completely sever the factory's communications.
Which is a highly targeted form of logistical warfare. I mean, severing the internet of a modern aerospace manufacturer brings operations to an immediate grinding halt.
Instantly.
And the source material makes it clear that this wasn't just symbolic noise. It caused severe logistical disruption and millions of pounds in physical damage.
Real economic impact.
Exactly. The group's sustained pressure actually contributed to the permanent closure of an Elbit subsidiary in Oldham.
Another site at Aztec West in Bristol closed down unexpectedly, too. They completely abandoned a lease that was supposed to run until 2029.
And beyond the real estate, our source notes that these multi-day shutdowns potentially contributed to the loss of a massive £2.1 billion Ministry of Defense contract.
Billion with a B. So they were undeniably achieving their stated goals of economic disruption against private companies. But here's where it gets really interesting. In June of 2025, the stakes completely changed.
This is the pivot.
The entire narrative shifted from corporate vandalism to a national security crisis. Activists rode electric scooters onto RAF Bryce Norton,
Which is an active Royal Air Force military base in Oxfordshire.
Right. They somehow bypassed military security, got right up to 2 Royal Air Force Airbus A330 refueling planes, and used those repurposed fire extinguishers to spray red paint directly into the jet engines.
The jet engines.
Yes.
And the activists released statements afterward claiming that the base was being used to send flights to Cyprus for reconnaissance over Gaza, and that Britain was actively refueling U.S. and Israeli fighter jets. They framed the vandalization of the engines as a direct intervention to prevent British war crimes.
But the official pushback on that was strong.
Very strong. The Ministry of Defense, along with subsequent reporting by the BBC, thoroughly rebutted that narrative. They released logs clarifying that those 2 specific aircraft had not been used to support the Israeli Air Force at all. Instead, they had actually been deployed for UK air attacks in Yemen, Iraq, and Syria.
I imagine that claiming you are stopping war crimes by painting a military jet didn't exactly earn much sympathy from the Ministry of Defense, regardless of where those planes were actually flying.
Not at all. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have to look at how a sovereign state views its own security apparatus. Breaking into a private factory that manufactures drone parts is handled by the police as criminal damage or aggravated trespass.
Right, standard police work.
But directly compromising active military aircraft on a highly secure Royal Air Force base. That fundamentally alters the state's calculus. The British government viewed the Bryce Norton breach as a direct, unacceptable threat to national security.
It crossed a red line.
It crossed a definitive red line, and it triggered an unprecedented and overwhelming state response.
And that response came swiftly. On July 5, 2025, just weeks after the base break-in, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper officially prescribed Palestine Action as a terrorist group. They used the Terrorism Act 2000.
To understand the weight of that decision, you have to look at the history of that act. This is a piece of legislation originally designed to combat groups like the IRA, and it was later adapted for international terror networks like Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Serious international threats.
Exactly. Prescription is the absolute nuclear option in British counterterrorism law. It means the group is outlawed entirely, and the penalties become draconian.
Very severe.
Under this act, simply being a member of the group, or even inviting support for it, carries a maximum penalty of up to 14 years in prison.
14 years. And the political mechanics of how this ban actually passed through Parliament are kind of a masterclass in legislative maneuvering. The government used a tactic called bundling.
Right. They didn't present a standalone vote on banning Palestine Action.
Exactly. Instead, they bundled Palestine Action into a single prescription order alongside 2 violently extreme neo-Nazi groups, the Maniacs Murder Cult and the Russian Imperial Movement.
Which essentially forces members of Parliament into a political trap.
Yeah.
MPs couldn't vote to debate the merits of banning Palestine Action individually. They had to vote to ban all 3 groups simultaneously, or none of them. One member of the House of Lords actually openly criticized the move as sneaky.
because if an MP voted against the ban due to civil liberty concerns regarding Palestine Action,
their political opponents could easily weaponize that vote.
right,
They could accuse them of voting to protect violent neo-Nazi organizations.
the pressure to push it through was immense, and it resulted in an overwhelming House of Commons vote of 385 to 26.
And once that ban took effect, the dragnet was immediate.
Immediate.
Mhm.
By the end of November 2025, over 2,500 people had been arrested, and the vast majority of these individuals weren't anywhere near a military base or a factory roof. They were swept up simply for showing public support for a newly banned organization.
The primary mechanism for this sweeping crackdown was Section 13 of the Terrorism Act. Section 13 essentially criminalizes the act of wearing, carrying, or displaying items that arouse reasonable suspicion that an individual is a member or supporter of a prescribed group.
And that carries a penalty of up to 6 months in prison.
Right.
And the application of Section 13 resulted in some truly surreal arrests that really highlight just how wide the net was cast. On the very day the ban took effect, July 5th, a group protested in London, and 29 people were immediately arrested.
Just for protesting.
Yeah, and one of them was an 83-year-old retired priest, Reverend Sue Parfit.
Wow.
In another instance, the police arrested a man simply for wearing a T-shirt that said, Plasticine Action.
Plasticine, like the play.
Exactly. He wore it to mock the ban, but the police apparently had to seriously evaluate a children's modeling clay pun as a potential threat to national security.
That is surreal.
He was later de-arrested, but the chilling effect was very clear. In August, a screenwriter in Edinburgh was arrested for wearing a T-shirt that simply read, Genocide in Palestine, time to take action.
And civil liberties groups immediately sounded the alarm over this. Organizations like Amnesty International, Liberty, and several UN experts argued that the UK was fundamentally misusing counterterrorism laws. They said the state was conflating disruptive civil disobedience with actual terrorism.
Amnesty issued statements warning that this represented an unprecedented legal overreach.
Furthermore, a declassified intelligence report published in September 2025 surfaced, and it essentially admitted that the vast majority of the group's actions, the graffiti, the petty vandalism, the sit-ins, they did not actually meet the legal threshold of terrorism. A senior counterterrorism researcher pointed out that relying on minor property damage to justify a terror ban marked a radical, concerning departure from how these laws had been historically applied.
And while thousands were dealing with arrests over T-shirts and signs, the human toll for the activists who actually carried out the direct action was intensifying in the prison system. Our source details the harrowing situation of a group dubbed the Filton 18.
Right, the Filton 18.
These were activists arrested by counter-terror police following a very severe raid on an Elbit facility at Aztec West. This was back in August 2024. During that raid, a police officer was struck with a sledgehammer and severely injured. But the controversy stemmed from their treatment within the legal system after the fact.
They were placed in pretrial detention, well past the standard 6-month custody limit. Some of these individuals were facing the prospect of being held in maximum security conditions for over a year before even receiving a trial date.
Which is a massive amount of time to be held without trial.
It is. And that prolonged detention led to a desperate escalation from the activists themselves. They initiated a hunger strike.
The strike began in November 2025, and it eventually grew to include up to 10 activists across various UK prisons. The physical and psychological toll of refusing food in a prison environment is profound.
It really is.
2 of those activists, Heba Marazi and Kamra Ahmed, sustained their hunger strike for a staggering 73 days. They finally ended it in mid-January 2026.
73 days. That prolonged hunger strike acted as a catalyst for international solidarity. It drew high-profile attention to the use of the Terrorism Act. Climate activist Greta Thunberg actually traveled to London to participate in a protest supporting the hunger strikers, and she was promptly arrested by the Metropolitan Police.
But perhaps the most illustrative example of the Terrorism Act's far-reaching implications came from the literary world.
Yes.
The Irish author Sally Rooney publicly pledged her continued support for the group. She even provided a witness statement for the court, stating she would maintain her support even if it meant her books were essentially banned from sale in the UK.
Because under the Terrorism Act, her publishers wouldn't legally be able to pay her royalties if there was a risk that the money might go toward financing a prescribed terror group.
Which perfectly demonstrates the financial and logistical ripple effects of prescription. It doesn't just neutralize the individuals wielding sledgehammers.
No, It potentially criminalizes the finances, publishing contracts, and speech of anyone publicly aligned with their stated cause. It isolates the group from the rest of society completely.
So what does this all mean for the legal system? How do the courts reconcile the state's need for security with the rights of its citizens? That brings us to February 13, 2026. This is when co-founder Huda Amori challenged the UK government in the High Court.
She initiated a judicial review, which is essentially a legal mechanism where judges examine whether a government decision was actually lawful to begin with.
And the lead up to this judicial review was steeped in procedural drama. Just a week before the hearing was scheduled, the judge who had initially granted permission for the appeal was suddenly removed from the case.
No public explanation given.
None. And replaced by a panel of 3 new judges. Campaigners were highly suspicious of this swap. Adding to the tension, during the hearing itself, the courtroom was closed to the public. And crucially, it was closed to Amori's own legal team for an entire day.
This is what's known as a closed material procedure. It allowed government lawyers to present secret evidence to the judges. It's a highly controversial practice in British law where the defense cannot see or challenge the evidence being used against them.
But despite the secret evidence and the sudden judge swap, the outcome sent shockwaves through the government. The panel of High Court judges unanimously ruled that the government's prescription of Palestine Action as a terrorist organization was, in fact, unlawful.
Unanimous. And this raises an important question about how the law defines and applies the concept of proportionality.
Right.
It is vital to note here that the judges did not exonerate the activists. In their detailed ruling, they explicitly describe Palestine Action as an organization that promotes its political cause through criminality.
They didn't sugarcoat it.
Not at all. They even acknowledged that a very small fraction of its actions might have technically met the definition of terrorist action. However, the legal test hinges on proportionality and human rights.
The judges ruled that dropping a blanket terrorism ban over the entire network was a disproportionate interference with their supporters' human rights, specifically the right to freedom of expression and freedom of association.
The judges drew a very clear line in the sand regarding how a modern democracy must handle systemic vandalism. They pointed out that the individuals who scaled the factories, who smashed the windows, who damaged the military planes, they can and absolutely should be prosecuted under existing standard criminal laws.
Because the state already has the tools to punish burglary, aggravated trespass, and criminal damage.
Exactly. The court essentially told the government, you do not need to invoke national security terror bans to prosecute people for vandalism, no matter how politically motivated or logistically disruptive that vandalism is.
And the fallout from this ruling is still actively shaping the legal landscape. The ban provisionally remains in place purely to allow the government time to appeal the ruling, but the Metropolitan Police immediately confirmed they have stopped arresting people under Section 13 for simply supporting the group.
The financial resources burned through during this legal battle are really astonishing.
Oh, absolutely. The government spent £700,000 just defending the ban during the judicial review. And the cost to the Metropolitan Police to enforce the ban, managing protests, processing 2,500 arrests, and deploying resources over just a 4-day period exceeded £10 million.
£10 million in 4 days perfectly illustrates the sheer unsustainability of applying counterterrorism policing to broad protest movements.
It is a dizzying sequence of events. We have tracked a localized direct action group that started with red boiler suits and repurposed fire extinguishers, escalating into a breach of a Royal Air Force base.
The huge escalation.
And that breach triggered a massive national security crisis, leading to the government utilizing its most severe counterterrorism legislation, sweeping up thousands of everyday supporters, sparking 73-day hunger strikes in maximum security prisons, and ultimately resulting in a historic high court defeat that ruled the state had fundamentally overreached in its definition of terror.
And as we close this analysis, there is a lingering detail buried in the statistics of our source material that really demands attention. During the height of these protests, more people were charged under Section 13 terrorism offenses, again, mostly for wearing T-shirts or carrying signs, than were charged under that same section during the entire 2-decade global war on terror.
That is staggering.
It forces us to ask a difficult question about the future. As modern protest movements increasingly move away from the traditional model of simply marching with signs and instead actively embrace direct economic and logistical sabotage to force corporate or political change, How will the law adapt?
Right.
Will Western democracies be forced to invent a completely new legal category that sits somewhere between aggravated trespass and international terrorism? How will societies in the future draw the line between highly disruptive civil disobedience and genuine terror?
It is a legal frontier we are all going to have to watch unfold because the tactics are clearly changing faster than the laws can keep up. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it helped you understand the incredibly complex mechanics of this story. Keep questioning the world around you, keep looking for the facts beneath the headlines, and we will catch you next time.